All right, here's part 3. This is the best part because we finally get to paint. All right, so one of the things that we haven't drawn earlier is a horizon line. And the reason I don't draw it previously is because sometimes kids get it just confused with all the other lines, so I like to add it now. You're just going to need a quick ruler for this, and you're just going to put it across your vase like so. And you're not going to draw on your vase at all, okay? And you want it to be, not necessarily halfway, about a third or so of the way up. And you want to make sure that it's straight. And then once it's straight and it's a third of the way up, then you're just going to hold it down and you're going to just draw your line on each side of the vase like this. Once it's drawn, then you can go ahead and also Sharpie it. All right, and now for painting. So let's talk a little bit about paint and what it is. So we have watercolor. My personal preference is Prang watercolors. They are lovely. My other preference for school-age kids is definitely just Crayola watercolors. If you have one of the larger palettes, that's awesome. But for this particular project, we're going to use mostly the main colors. You can always add the other colors also. So watercolor is unique in the sense that it is a very concentrated color. Okay, so when you use watercolor, you need to make sure that you're using plenty of water. You don't want to ever use like a dry brush when you're using watercolor. Okay, so you're gonna need your watercolor, you're gonna need a paper towel, you're gonna need obviously some water in a cup. Now, please don't sit there and use your mom's favorite coffee cup or anything like that. Watercolor doesn't necessarily stain, but it's still paint, okay? Use, a plastic cup if you have one, an old container. This is an old fruit container. Something along those lines that if it does get ruined, it's not gonna be a big deal to your parents, okay? So, water. And inside of your watercolors, you have paintbrushes. This one has a pretty skinny paintbrush like this. Some of them have a little bit bigger, and a lot of them are hard when you first touch the bristles. So you just kind of, nicely play with it, going downward with it, and it'll take that off. Okay, that's just so that the bristles stay together and transport. All right, so here's all of my colors, and they're always in rainbow order: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, brown, and black. And then this one is the same, except for my black is next to my red. Okay. So we're going to start off painting our cactus. And another thing when you're painting with watercolor is that you don't want to paint, colors right next to each other because they're so wet, they'll end up bleeding, okay? So here's my picture and here's my paint. I'm going to try to get most of it in the screen together. And I'm just going to take water and I'm just going to kind of swirl it around in with my brush, okay? And we're going to start off with painting a cactus yellow. Now with watercolor, you can pre-mix your colors, but for this particular one, we're gonna layer our colors. So we're gonna make 3 different shades of green. And to make 3 different shades of green, you're gonna mix green with the 2 colors it's made with, which is yellow and blue. But we're gonna mix it on our paper by layering them, which sounds a little confusing, but it'll make sense in a minute. So you're going to take your water and you're just going to kind of put some of it on top of your yellow, okay? And I'm not digging in my paint. I'm just kind of, barely brushing it on top. And it should have a nice little puddle of water, okay? And I'm going to take this and I'm going to decide which one I want to be my lightest color cactus. And I'm going to choose this one. And I'm going to paint it. Notice my paint isn't really, really dark, okay? If your paint is really dark, you didn't use near enough water. And then every time I go back to get more paint, you always go into your water first. Now, you're not swirling your brush around, you're just dipping it in the water, and then you're just getting some more paint, okay? Every time you need more color. And then you're going to move this around, water, paint. When I'm done with my yellow, I'm going to rinse out my brush, and then I'm going to just kind of wipe it off on my paper towel just to make sure I get all the extra yellow out. And then I'm going to get more water on my brush. Now, I don't want to paint right here because this is wet still, and this is going to be wet, and they might potentially bleed together. So I'm going to skip this one for now, and I'm going to work on this cactus, okay? For this cactus, I want mine to be a little bit just plain green. I'm going to let this one be a little bit darker. So I'm just going to use my regular good old green. I'm just going to get my water on my brush, make myself a puddle. Remember, I'm not digging into it. I'm just kind of going right on top, just nice and easy. And then I'm going to paint this one green. Now, one of the biggest things is when you're painting, okay, you don't want to paint right up against the edge. You want to paint kind of next to it, because when you push your brush down, it's gonna go closer to the edge for you. And you want to have a pretty consistent color, okay? So that's why you're always going back into that water. And you also want to avoid, having big puddles created, so you have to move that paint around. Now, when you use your brush, you're not scribbling with your brush all crazy. You're just nice and easy paintbrush strokes. All right, and my last cactus I'm gonna have is a little bit darker, so I'm gonna take my brush and I'm gonna get my water on it, and I'm gonna get into my blue. And again, don't dig in your paint, nice and easy. I'm gonna paint this blue. Now let's say I go and I forget to get water and I just grab paint and I start painting and it gets way too dark. You're like, oh, that's so much darker than the rest. All you do is go back in the water and then move that around. Okay, you don't go back into your paint. And because this is not watercolor paper, you have to be really cautious also of how much water you're putting on your page. So it's like a weird balance that you have to find, because if you sit there and you paint and you paint and you paint and you paint in one space for way too long, what's going to happen is you're going to dig a hole in your paper. So just be cautious about how much paint and water you have on your brush. All right, so I'm done with my blue and my yellow and my green. Now my blue is still really wet, so I'm gonna just, wait a couple seconds, a minute at the most, before I work on this yellow, because I'm gonna be painting on top of this yellow and I don't want it to blend into my blue. So I'm just gonna give it a minute, and then we're gonna continue painting this. All right, so mine's been a minute. So I'm gonna take my brush and clean it out. And I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna make more of a puddle in my green. Now, I've already used my green, so it's still going to be a little soft, so definitely don't dig into it. I'm going to get my brush with some green on it. I'm going to paint right on top of this yellow. Okay, and I got way too much green, so I'm going to add some water, and then I'm going to move that green around. And what this does is this creates a yellow green, and it's lighter. Than my regular green. And I had way too much paint, so I'm just pushing it up. I'm barely touching that green because I don't need a lot. So this is my yellow green, and then you can see the difference between that and my green. Then I'm going to go ahead and get my brush, and since I'm still painting the same green color, I'm going to paint right on top of this blue as well. And so painting on top of the blue with green creates a blue-green, and it's a darker shade of green. All right. Now, if you have flowers, I would definitely wait until your cactus are pretty dry to paint them. But you can paint your flowers whatever color you want if you want them to be orange or pink or yellow, just whatever you choose. All right. So I'm going to let this dry for a few minutes, and then I'm going to work on my flowers. All right, so it's been a minute, so I'm going to go ahead and take my water, and I'm going to get into my red. And I'm not digging a whole lot in my red. I'm just kind of going on the edge, and I'm going to paint this flower. Now, if you get too much water on your brush, you're like, oh man, that's just too much. You can just kind of dab it on your paper towel and then move around what you have left. Okay. And painting a small space is really hard, so I'm going to wipe that off. My other flower, I think I'm going to do yellow. Now, I'm wiping off my brush. I rinsed it. I rinsed the red out. I'm wiping all this off. I don't want my brush to be super, super wet. And I already have a puddle of water, which would now be paint in my yellow. So I'm going to barely touch it, and I'm just going to go ahead and paint this one yellow, because I don't want a lot of water on my brush. All right. And then lastly, I'm going to, for my cactus area, I'm going to rinse my brush again and get water on my brush. And I'm going to make a small little puddle in my brown. And I'm going to take this brush and I'm going to paint my dirt, because cactus grows out of dirt. Now, I didn't paint this perfectly straight, because dirt isn't straight. It kind of goes up around my cactus, and it can be partially on the cactus, so that way it looks like it's growing out of the dirt. And I'm going to get some more water, some more brown, and paint the rest of my dirt. Okay, next we're going to work on our patterns on our vessel. And this is kind of where you have to have some planning. You're like, all right, what colors do I want to use? How exactly do I want to paint this? Am I going to paint it in a type of pattern? How do I want to paint this? And you also have to think, what color do I want my background back here? Maybe I want my background yellow. Maybe I want it orange. Maybe I want it red. Your background can be whatever color you choose. Your table, though, your table should stick with, brown. That's usually the best option for your table. Now, the reason you have to think so far ahead is, let's say I choose for my background to be orange, okay? If I paint this part orange and say I paint this band orange also, they're going to be touching and it's going to look strange. Now, if I paint this orange and let's say I paint down here orange, that's going to be okay, because I have my horizon line and they're not going to be touching, because my background goes up to my horizon line, and then this table part is considered your foreground, okay? So I am going to paint my background orange. And so thinking about that, I'm going to keep, orange to a minimum on here, or at least below the horizon line. And I'm going to think, how else do I want to paint this? Well, you can be as creative as you want with it. You can be, just solid colors if you choose. I think, you want to make it visually interesting for sure. So when I paint mine, for example, and I'm going to use, let's say, yellow. And again, I cleaned my brush, I got more water, and I'm barely touching this puddle of yellow because I already have the puddle of yellow. I'm not digging in my paint. And let's say I want to paint this. Even though it's black, you can technically, accidentally paint on top of it, and it's not that big of a deal. But, you don't really want to sit there and just continue to paint on top of the black area. All right? That was pretty dark, so I'm going to move that over. And you want to sit there and you paint this. Now, let's say I want to sit there and go, ooh, maybe I want this part to be red. So I'm going to rinse my brush really good, pat it on the paper towel, rinse, and then get some more water on it. And then I'm going to pick up some red, and I'm going to paint these little areas, okay? Now, yours is a little bit bigger than mine, so your areas are going to be larger. But if you get too much water and paint in a section, for example, you can take a paper towel. Now, don't rub and I'm going to clean it. That's a horrible idea. Don't do that. But you can take it and you can set it down and lift it right back up, and it's going to pick up that extra water that was there. Okay, again, you can set it down and pick it up. Do not smear it, okay? Then I'm going to go ahead and get some more water, and I'm going to get my paint, and I'm going to paint this next section, and I'm going to continue on over.